Today's video. After the child was born, a woman silently disappeared. Introduction. A birth and a disappearance. The child was born with its first cry. The room was filled with lights, congratulations, familiar phrases. Mother and child are both well, how happy. From now on, life turns a new page. All eyes were on the baby. And at that very moment, something very quietly happened. A woman began to disappear. No one named that disappearance. There was no ceremony, no farewell. It was simply that from this moment on, people no longer asked who she was, how she felt, or what she needed. She was called by a new name, the baby's mother. That woman was still here, in flesh and blood. But her old self, with its own weariness, its own small desires, its unspoken emotions, began to recede. Deeply, deeply, amidst the joy of new life, no one noticed she was silently trying to adapt. No one noticed that, even while holding her child in her arms, she might feel empty, confused, or alienated from herself. And no one asked, "Are you okay?" The birth of a child is often celebrated as the happiest moment. But for many women, it is also the moment they begin to no longer recognize themselves in the mirror. Not because they don't love their child, but because in that joy, they themselves have been forgotten. If you are listening to these words and feel your heart sink, perhaps, you too have silently disappeared like that. The woman before becoming a mother. Before being called mother, she was a woman with a name. A name given not out of responsibility, but because that's who she was. She used to have slow mornings, where time wasn't fragmented by crying or feeding schedules. She knew whether she preferred hot or cold coffee, silence or talk, being alone or having someone listen. These were small things, but they were a map to help her know who she was. She used to have dreams, not necessarily grand ones, perhaps just doing her job well, traveling alone, finishing a book, getting enough sleep without feeling guilty. She used to imagine the future with a unique excitement, where she still clearly felt present. She also used to have weaknesses. There were times when she felt tired, sad, and confused, and she was allowed to admit it. She had the right to say, "I'm not okay today," without needing to explain too much. Her emotions weren't something to hide to please others. Before becoming a mother, she was seen as a complete person. No one assumed she had to sacrifice everything. No one demanded she be constantly strong. No one said that from now on, her feelings had to take a backseat to others. Then one day, she became pregnant. The world began to look at her differently. The questions changed. Is eating like this good for the baby? Will thinking like this affect the baby? Gradually, everything revolved around an unborn life, and that was natural. But in the process, she began to learn to humble herself. No one told her clearly that, from now on, she would have to divide herself to meet the expectations of so many people. That there would be times when she no longer knew what she liked, what she needed, or how she felt. That there would be days when she would miss an old version of herself, and feel guilty just for missing it. The woman before motherhood was not selfish. She was simply a human being with a need to breathe, to rest, to be herself. But as the role of mother approached, society began subtly sending a message: your child comes first. As for you, you can wait. No one said it directly. It was wrapped in compliments. Sacrifice is a sacred duty. Motherhood is about selflessness. And she, with love, believed it to be true. She learned to push aside her weariness, suppress her emotions, and tell herself, "I'll be all right." But the woman before motherhood doesn't disappear instantly. She just becomes quieter, less talkative of herself, less demanding, less present in conversations unrelated to her children. And at some point, when she tries to remember who she once was, that memory fades. Not because she's no longer valuable, but because no one reminds her anymore that she still matters. If you're listening and feel a pang in your heart, perhaps you were once that woman too. A woman who existed so clearly, before learning to step back and make room for everything. When the role of mother swallows the old person, the role of mother didn't come as a sudden shock. It came slowly, little by little, gentle enough to go unnoticed, but deep enough to sweep away almost everything she once was. Initially, it was just a disrupted routine. Time was no longer measured by morning or evening, but by feedings, naps, and sudden cries. She learned to wake up groggily, her reflexes faster than her thoughts. Her body was constantly active, while her mind was always taut like a string that had never been loosened. Then came the unnamed expectations. A mother must know everything. A mother must endure. A mother must not complain. No one said it directly, but every glance implicitly confirmed it. And she, out of love for her child, out of fear that she hadn't done enough, took on everything herself. Things that once belonged to her began to fall away. A hot meal left unfinished. A conversation cut short. A thought that flashed through her mind was interrupted by crying. She became accustomed to putting herself on standby. There were days when she couldn't remember the last time she laughed freely. She couldn't remember the last time she was asked, "How are you today?" All the questions revolved around the child, and she answered in a monotone voice, as if she were merely a messenger. The role of mother began to overshadow language. She was no longer called by name. Just the baby's mother, that baby's mother, her mother. It seemed that her old self was no longer necessary to be recognized. She also no longer allowed herself to be weak. Whenever she felt tired, she told herself, "Every mother goes through this." Whenever she felt sad, she blamed herself. "What am I even sad about?" Her emotions were suppressed, becoming more compact, more silent, so as not to bother anyone. There was a painful paradox. She loved her child so much that she was willing to sacrifice everything, but because of that, she gradually lost the ability to love herself. Not because she didn't know it was important, but because she no longer had the energy to remember. The role of mother not only took up her time, it took up her inner space. Every thought began with, "What does my child need? Is my child okay?" And, "What about me?" became a luxury question. And then there were those small but very real moments. When she stood before the mirror, looking at a familiar yet strange face. When she heard someone call her name, her old name, and felt her heart skip a beat. It was as if a part of her whispered, "I'm still here." But that whisper was weak. Because with each passing day, the role of mother was reinforced stronger, with praise when she endured, with silence when she was tired, with the expectation that she would manage on her own, because all mothers do. No one realized that her old self didn't disappear because she wanted it to. It was swallowed up by a role that allowed no mistakes, no days off, and no room for unnamed emotions. If you're listening here and feel a slow weariness creeping through you, perhaps you too are living in that role, a role that has made you a devoted mother, but at the same time, has made you forget how vibrant a woman you once were. The silent disappearance. That disappearance didn't have a clear moment to point out. It wasn't a day she woke up and decided, "From now on, I'm not going to be myself anymore." It happened silently, slowly, like water seeping into the earth. By the time she realized it, everything was already soaked. No one saw her collapse. She still fulfilled her role, still taking care of the children, still answering messages, still being there when needed. But inside, a void was growing wider and wider, and no one asked about it. She started talking less, not because she had nothing to say, but because she didn't know where to begin. Her stories seemed to have no place anymore. They were too trivial, too tiring, too inappropriate. She learned to smile and get it over with. Nod along the way. Saying, "It's okay," became a reflex, even when her body and mind were simultaneously crying out for help. This disappearance manifested itself in very small things. She no longer recognized herself in the mirror, not because her appearance had changed, but because her eyes were different. Less curious, less vibrant, as if a thin layer of mist had obscured the once vibrant person. There were evenings when everything was quiet, and she sat there, neither sad nor happy. Just empty, not knowing what she was thinking, nor what she wanted. Emotions became flat, like an endless straight line. The most terrifying thing about this silent disappearance was, no one realized it was a problem. Not even herself, because she still did everything. still fulfilling the role of a good mother. And she convinced herself, she had no right to be tired. I mustn't be weak. There are many people who suffer more than I do. Those thoughts weren't true, but they resonated long enough to become beliefs. And from then on, she learned to remove herself from the list of people she needed to care for. The disappearance also occurred in the way she treated herself. She ate hastily, slept fitfully, ignored her body's signs of fatigue. She no longer listened to herself, because she was too busy listening to the needs of everyone else. There were times when she wished she could disappear completely. Not to die, but to rest, to not have to think, to not have to feel responsible for anything for even a moment. But even that wish, she didn't dare admit, because it made her feel guilty, and so she continued to remain silent. A silent disappearance, without a sound, without big tears. Only weariness accumulates, day after day. Only the feeling of being alive, but not truly present. If someone looks from the outside, they will see a mother trying. But if they look from the inside, they will see a woman slowly fading away in her own life. If you are listening to this and see yourself in these lines, please know that this disappearance is not due to weakness. It is a sign that you have endured too long without support. And most importantly, you haven't completely disappeared. You just desperately need to be seen, gently and safely. When pain is misunderstood, a mother's pain after childbirth is rarely seen for what it truly is. Not because it doesn't exist, but because it's often misunderstood, downplayed, or dismissed with seemingly harmless statements. Having a child is a blessing. Every mother is tired. You'll get used to it. These statements aren't malicious. They're said with the intention of comforting and encouraging. But for someone experiencing prolonged exhaustion, they inadvertently become a wall. Preventing her from speaking further. Preventing her from explaining. Preventing her from being acknowledged that she is truly in pain. Her pain isn't what people usually imagine. It's not always about crying. It's not always about obvious despair. Sometimes, it's just the empty feeling of holding a baby in your arms. It's the exhaustion that doesn't go away after a night's sleep. It's the feeling that you're doing everything right, but you don't feel like you're anywhere in it. But because outwardly she's okay, the pain is downplayed. People see that she's still taking good care of her child, still fulfilling her responsibilities, and conclude, she's strong. No one asks what the price of that strength is. When she tries to speak up, the reaction is usually a comparison. My mother had a harder time. Some people don't even have the resources you do. These comparisons don't lessen her pain. They only make her feel like she has no right to be in pain. And so she begins to doubt her own feelings. Am I overreacting? Am I being selfish? Am I unworthy of being a mother? The most dangerous misunderstanding didn't come from others. It came from herself, when she believed her pain was wrong. That this feeling of exhaustion was a moral flaw. That if she truly loved her child, she shouldn't feel this way. There's something rarely said. Loving a child doesn't exempt a person from exhaustion. Loving a child doesn't stop the brain from getting tired. Loving a child doesn't erase the need for rest, for being heard, for being a limited human being. But when the pain was misunderstood for too long, she learned to be silent. Not because she was okay, but because she was tired of explaining. Tired of the incomprehensible stares. Tired of having to prove that her pain was serious enough. There were days when she wondered, if I truly broke down, would people believe me then? But then even that thought frightened her, and she returned to her familiar silence. The pain of being misunderstood isn't loud. It accumulates. It makes her withdraw, little by little, until she's no longer sure if anyone truly wants to listen, or just wants her to get better faster. If you're in this state, please listen to this very important thing. You don't need to hurt in a big enough way to be recognized. You don't need to completely break down to get help, and you're not wrong to feel tired in your role as a mother. Your pain doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. What you need isn't to be compared, but to be understood. Postpartum depression. It doesn't always have a name. Not every mother experiencing postpartum depression knows she's in it. Because postpartum depression doesn't always present with clear, dramatic signs. Often, it has no name, Just a vague feeling that, I'm no longer myself. People often think of depression as crying a lot, as despair, as being unable to leave the bed. But for many mothers, depression takes a different form. They still wake up early. They still care for their baby. They still get everything done. It's just that inside, they no longer feel anything distinct. It might be a feeling of emptiness when watching their baby sleep. Not sad, not happy, just empty. It might be a persistent fatigue that doesn't go away despite trying to rest. It could be a feeling of estrangement from one's own child, followed by the guilt that follows. Because these feelings don't resemble the familiar image of depression, they are easily overlooked. The mother tells herself, it's probably just fatigue. Everything will be all right when the baby is older. And so she continues to endure, without realizing she needs support. Postpartum depression is not just an emotional issue. It involves hormonal changes, prolonged sleep deprivation, role pressure, and accumulated loneliness. When the body is overloaded for a long time, the mind seeks to shut off emotions in order to survive. And that numbness is often mistaken for stability. There is a very common but rarely named sign: feeling like an outsider in one's own family. Feeling that everyone would be okay without her, or even, would be relieved. This is not an uncommon thought. But because it's so frightening, it's often buried in silence. Many mothers don't dare speak out for fear of being judged. Fear of being labeled weak. Fear of being thought that they don't love their child. And so depression continues to exist in the shadows, nameless, shapeless, but very real. It's important to make it clear: postpartum depression is not your fault. It doesn't reflect the value of motherhood. It doesn't speak of the love you have for your child. It only shows that you've had to adapt to too many changes without enough support. Not everyone experiences devastating breakdowns. Many people simply gradually lose the ability to feel joy, gradually lose their sense of presence in life. And because everything happens so slowly, they think it's normal. But normal doesn't mean healthy. Surviving doesn't mean being okay. If you're listening and see yourself in those descriptions, you don't need to wait until things get worse to seek help. You don't need a full diagnosis to acknowledge that you're not okay. Just a very honest thought: I need help. Naming depression isn't about labeling it. It's about opening a door to understanding, to support, to recovery. And even if you can't name your feelings, it still deserves attention. You still deserve to be heard. You are still a human being in need of healing, not just a mother trying to endure. The small path. Finding the woman WHO disappeared. There's no transformation here. There's no moment when everything becomes clear, the weariness vanishes, or you become who you used to be. The path to finding the woman who disappeared isn't a big leap. It's a series of small paths, safe enough so you don't have to strain yourself any further. The first small path is acknowledgement. Not to the whole world, just to yourself. A very quiet statement: I'm not okay. No explanation needed, no comparison needed, no justification needed, just acknowledgement, because when you correctly identify your feelings, you stop treating them as something to hide. The next small path is allowing yourself to have needs. It sounds obvious, but for many mothers, this is a luxury. Allow yourself to rest. Allow yourself to be listened to. Allow yourself to be unwell one day without feeling guilty. You don't need to be perfectly self-caring. Sometimes, it's just eating a leisurely meal, sitting still for 5 minutes doing nothing, taking deep breaths, as if your body also needs to be held. The third little path is sharing in a safe space. Not everyone needs to know. Not everyone needs to understand. Just one person, or one place, where you're not being corrected, judged, or pressured to think positively. That could be a calm friend, a small group, a professional, or even writing down things you've never dared to say. You don't need to tell your whole story. Just don't be alone with it. The next little path is to remember, very gently, who you used to be. Not to go back to exactly who you were, but to realize that she never completely disappeared. Maybe it's a song you used to like, an old habit, a small hobby, a familiar feeling that makes your heart flutter, even if only for a moment. These moments aren't meant to heal immediately. They just need to remind you that, inside your role as a mother, you are still a woman with your own inner world. The most important little path is not to wait until everything falls apart. You don't need to hit rock bottom to deserve help. You don't need to be worse to be cared for. Prolonged exhaustion is a clear enough signal. Seeking support isn't admitting failure. It's an act of care, for you, and for the child who needs a mother who is still strong enough to be present. And there's something that needs to be said, though it's not easy to hear. You can't find yourself again while still believing you have to bear everything alone. Motherhood doesn't mean disappearing. Sacrifice doesn't mean erasing yourself. The woman who disappeared doesn't need you to become stronger. She needs you to soften. Slow down. Stop treating yourself like a machine that must work non-stop. This path may be very slow. There may be days when you get lost again. But each time you stop to listen to yourself, you're taking one small, but real, step. And each of those small steps, over time, will form a path wide enough for you to be both a mother and yourself. In conclusion, that woman didn't disappear forever. That woman never truly disappeared. She only retreated deeply, making room for responsibility, for love, for the role of motherhood that she embraced with all her heart. She was silent not because she had lost her voice, but because it had been too long since anyone asked her what she needed. And she herself had forgotten that she still had the right to be cared for. But no matter how long you've lost yourself, no matter how accustomed you've become to putting yourself last, that woman is still there. In those moments when you sigh for no apparent reason. In those moments when your heart sinks upon hearing an old song. In that small but very real feeling, I don't want to disappear like this. Motherhood can change you, but it has no right to erase you. You don't need to go back to how you were before. You don't need to be stronger. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Just allow yourself to be a little more fully present each day. If today you can only do one small thing, take a few extra minutes to rest. Speak your true feelings, or simply admit, I'm tired. That's enough. That woman doesn't need to be found again in perfect form. She just needs to be seen, heard, and treated gently by you. And if you are here, listening to these last lines, that means you are still here, and as long as you are here, you haven't disappeared.